What if I told you that heavy metal's most fearless icons were slowly destroying themselves while fans cheered louder than ever? On stage, they looked untouchable. Screaming guitars, wild crowds, pure madness. But backstage, many were trapped in addiction, chasing highs that never lasted. Careers collapsed, friendships burned, and lives slipped away in real time. Some metal legends survived by a miracle. Others were not so lucky. Today, you are stepping into the darkest chapter of metal history. These are the 20 worst junkies, heavy metal junkies ever produced. The stories are raw, disturbing, and impossible to forget. 20. Wes Scantland. Wes Scantland's story fits the title, Worst Junkies in Heavy Metal History, in a raw, uncomfortable way. Even though Puddle of Mudd sits on the edge of post-grunge and metal, its personal downfall is one of the messiest substance abuse sagas tied to heavy music culture. When the band exploded with massive hits, Wes looked like he had everything lined up: fame, money, radio dominance, and a voice people instantly recognized. But behind the scenes, drugs and alcohol were already steering the wheel. As the years rolled on, addiction stopped being a rumor and became the headline. Arrests, public meltdowns, stage incidents, and courtroom appearances piled up fast. Performances turned unpredictable. Some nights he showed up clearly intoxicated, other nights he did not show up at all. Bandmates came and went, burned out by chaos they could not control. Each comeback attempt felt shaky, followed by another relapse splashed across the news. What made Wes Scantland's case especially damaging was how public it became. Hotel standoffs, domestic issues, police reports, and viral clips painted a picture of a man trapped in a loop he could not escape. Instead of music leading the conversation, addiction took center stage. Promoters hesitated. Fans lost trust. The industry quietly backed away. Unlike some metal figures who hid their demons until the end, Wes unraveled in real time, with the world watching. His career became a cautionary tale about how unchecked addiction can slowly erase talent, credibility, and opportunity. By the time the dust settled, his name was no longer tied to records or tours, but to repeated collapses fueled by substance abuse, making his fall one of the most visible and painful in heavy music history. 19. Sebastian Bach. Sebastian Bach's fall lines up painfully well with the idea of worst junkies in heavy metal history, not because he lacked talent, but because alcohol slowly took control of everything around him. When Skid Row exploded onto the scene, Sebastian had the voice, the look, and the attitude that defined late 80s metal. He was loud, fearless, and unforgettable. But offstage, alcohol was becoming more than a party habit. It was shaping his behavior, his decisions, and eventually his career. As fame grew, so did the chaos. Heavy drinking fueled reckless moments, public outbursts, and constant tension inside the band. Arguments turned explosive, relationships with bandmates broke down fast, and trust disappeared. Skid Row wanted control and discipline. Sebastian wanted freedom and excess. Alcohol magnified every conflict and made compromise impossible. By the time the split happened, it felt less like a shock and more like an inevitable crash. After leaving Skid Row, the pattern followed him. Drunken incidents made headlines instead of music. Arrests, controversial statements, and unpredictable behavior damaged his reputation in the industry. Even when his vocal talent remained strong, promoters and collaborators saw risk instead of reliability. Alcohol had quietly rewritten his image. Sebastian Bach never fully lost his voice, but addiction stole momentum, stability, and long-term growth. His story shows how substance abuse does not always end in death, but can be destructive. Sometimes it slowly burns bridges, isolates talent, and leaves a career stuck in the shadow of what could have been. 18. Dimebag Darrell. Dimebag Darrell is remembered as one of the greatest guitarists metal ever produced, but his relationship with alcohol places him firmly in this list. From Pantera's rise onward, drinking was woven into his image, his lifestyle, and the band's culture. Partying was not occasional. It was constant, celebrated, and pushed to extremes. Whiskey bottles, backstage drinking, and non-stop intoxication became part of the myth. Unlike some artists who used drugs in private, Dimebag's heavy drinking was open and normalized. It fueled wild nights, reckless decisions, and a chaotic environment that followed the band everywhere. Over time, alcohol affected his health, judgment, and safety awareness. Friends and crew often spoke about how intoxication shaped daily life on the road. What makes Dimebag's story especially tragic is how alcohol blurred the line between fun and danger. Security was loose, boundaries were weak, chaos was accepted as normal. While alcohol did not directly cause his death, it played a role in creating an atmosphere where risk was ignored and warning signs were missed. Dimebag Darrell's talent was undeniable, but addiction was always riding shotgun. His legacy is split between genius musicianship and a lifestyle that refused limits. His story stands as a reminder that even legends are vulnerable when excess becomes routine instead of an exception. 17. Mike Starr. Mike Starr's addiction story is one of the darkest and most painful chapters connected to heavy metal and grunge. As the original bassist of Alice in Chains, he helped shape a sound that defined an entire generation. Early success came fast, but so did heroin. What started as experimentation quickly turned into dependency, and that dependency took over everything. Mike's drug use became so severe that it directly impacted the band. Missed rehearsals, unreliable performances, and dangerous behavior forced Alice in Chains to make an impossible choice. They removed him from the band, not out of cruelty, but survival. Even then, addiction did not loosen its grip. It followed him into every phase of his life. Years later, his struggles played out publicly. Reality television exposed how deep the damage ran. Attempts at sobriety were short-lived, followed by relapses that hit harder each time. Friends tried to help. Interventions came and went. Nothing seemed strong enough to overpower addiction. Mike Starr's death was not sudden or shocking. It felt like the final chapter of a long, painful decline that everyone saw coming but could not stop. His story fits this list because it shows how addiction can erase opportunity, health, and identity, leaving behind only loss and unanswered grief. 16. Paul Di'Anno. Paul Di'Anno's place in Worst Junkies in heavy metal history is tragic because he stood at the very beginning of Iron Maiden's legacy. As the band's original vocalist, he helped define their raw, aggressive early sound. The future was wide open. Fame, tours, and global success were within reach. But drugs and alcohol quickly became obstacles he could not overcome. Substance abuse affected his reliability almost immediately. Missed shows, weak performances, and erratic behavior created tension inside the band. Iron Maiden was disciplined, driven, and focused on growth. Paul was spiraling in the opposite direction. Addiction made consistency impossible, and the band eventually replaced him to survive. After leaving Iron Maiden, his career never recovered. Addiction followed him through failed projects, legal trouble, health problems, and financial instability. Promises of hope. Comebacks faded as drugs continued to dominate his life. Physical decline set in early, leaving him struggling to perform even basic tasks later on. Paul Di'Anno's story is one of the clearest examples of how addiction can destroy potential before it fully blooms. He did not fall from the top. He was pushed off the ladder before reaching it. His name remains tied to Iron Maiden's early days, but his personal downfall remains a sobering lesson in how fast drugs can erase destiny. 15. Gary Moore. Gary Moore's addiction story often gets overlooked because of his massive talent, but it belongs in Worst Junkies in heavy metal history for how quietly alcohol took control of his life. Known for his fiery guitar work with Thin Lizzy and his powerful solo career, Gary was respected across rock and heavy metal circles. On stage, he looked focused and sharp. Off stage, alcohol slowly became a constant companion. Drinking was part of the culture around him, but over time, it stopped being social and became habitual. Long tours, pressure to deliver perfection, and emotional intensity pushed him deeper into alcohol dependence. Friends and collaborators noticed mood swings, exhaustion, and declining health, even while his music remained strong. Unlike some artists whose addictions were loud and chaotic, Gary's struggle was quieter, which made it easier to ignore and harder to stop. As the years passed, alcohol began to wear his body down, his health suffered, and the warning signs became impossible to miss. Even then, stepping away from drinking proved difficult. The lifestyle he had lived for decades offered little space for moderation or rest. Gary Moore's death shocked fans, but in hindsight, the long-term effects of alcohol were clear. His addiction did not erase his brilliance, but it shortened his life and stole years that could have been spent creating more music. His story shows how even controlled, private addiction can still be deadly. 14. Sid Vicious. Sid Vicious represents one of the most extreme addiction stories connected to heavy music culture. While the Sex Pistols leaned more toward punk, his influence and image bled directly into heavy metal's darker attitude. Sid was barely a musician, but his addiction made him infamous. Heroin was not just part of his life, it was the center of it. From the moment he joined the band, drugs shaped his identity. He often appeared on stage unable to play, barely standing, completely detached from reality. Addiction was not hidden or managed. It was celebrated, encouraged, and pushed further by the chaos around him. Heroin erased discipline, responsibility, and any chance of growth. His relationship with Nancy Spungen was fueled by drugs and violence, creating a toxic spiral that ended in tragedy. After her death, Sid's addiction only deepened. Jail, withdrawal, and relapse followed in rapid succession. There was no recovery phase, no reflection, only acceleration toward the end. Sid Vicious became a symbol of self-destruction rather than music. His life burned out fast, leaving behind shock instead of achievement. He fits this list because addiction did not just damage his career, it completely replaced it. Drugs became his legacy, overshadowing everything else. 13. Dee Dee Ramone. Dee Dee Ramone's addiction story is one of the longest and most relentless in heavy music history. As the bassist and primary songwriter for the Ramones, he helped shape aggressive, fast, stripped-down music that influenced countless metal bands. But behind the simple songs was a lifetime of heroin addiction that never truly let go. Dee Dee started using drugs at a young age, long before fame arrived. Once success hit, access became unlimited. Heroin followed him through tours, recordings, and daily life. Even while writing iconic songs, he was battling constant dependence. The addiction caused instability, paranoia, and emotional pain that never faded. Eventually, drugs pushed him out of the band. His behavior became too unpredictable, and his health continued to decline. After leaving the Ramones, addiction stayed with him. Attempts at sobriety came and went, often collapsing under pressure or isolation. Dee Dee's later years were marked by poverty, illness, and relapse. Despite moments of clarity and creativity, heroin remained a shadow he could not escape. His death felt like the final chapter of a long struggle. His story belongs here because addiction did not just interrupt his career, it followed him until the very end. 12. Randy Blythe. Randy Blythe's place on this list is different, but still earned. As the frontman of Lamb of God, he became known for intensity, aggression, and raw honesty. Alcohol played a major role in shaping that image. For years, heavy drinking was normalized as part of touring life. It fueled wild nights and reckless behavior that nearly destroyed him. Alcohol addiction affected Randy's judgment and safety, both on and off stage. Injuries, violent incidents, and close calls stacked up. The lifestyle became unsustainable. Unlike others on this list, Randy reached a breaking point before it was too late. A serious wake-up call forced him to confront how deeply alcohol had taken over. Choosing sobriety was not easy, but it changed everything. He openly acknowledged how addiction nearly ended his career and life. His story still fits this list because of how destructive alcohol was during his peak years. The difference is that he survived it. Randy Blythe's experience shows how addiction can grip even the strongest personalities. His honesty about the damage makes his story powerful, but it also proves how close heavy metal culture can come to losing another life to substance abuse. 11. Phil Anselmo. Phil Anselmo's descent into addiction is one of the most intense and controversial stories in heavy metal history. As the frontman of Pantera, he embodied aggression, power, and dominance. On stage, he looked unstoppable. Off-stage, drugs slowly took control of his body and mind. Painkillers, heroin, and alcohol became daily tools, first to manage physical pain and later to escape emotional pressure. A severe back injury pushed Phil deeper into opioid use, but addiction quickly went far beyond medical need. Heroin entered the picture, and everything changed. His behavior became unpredictable, violent, and confrontational. Interviews turned hostile. Performances became erratic. Relationships inside Pantera deteriorated fast, fueled by substance abuse and paranoia. His drug use reached a terrifying peak when he overdosed and was declared clinically dead for several minutes. That moment alone places him firmly on this list. Even after surviving, addiction continued to shape his public image. Controversial actions and statements followed him for years, many tied to impaired judgment and long-term substance damage. Phil Anselmo's addiction did not just harm him physically, it fractured one of the most powerful bands of metal ever produced. Pantera collapsed under the weight of unresolved conflict and drug-fueled instability. His story fits this title because addiction did not merely coexist with his success. It actively dismantled it, leaving lasting scars on his career and reputation. 10. Layne Staley. Layne Staley's addiction story is often cited as one of the most heartbreaking in heavy music history. As the voice of Alice in Chains, Layne delivered haunting lyrics that felt painfully real. That pain was not an act. Heroin addiction ruled his life long before the public fully understood how deep it went. As fame increased, Layne withdrew. Touring became impossible. Public appearances grew rare. His physical appearance deteriorated rapidly, reflecting years of heavy drug use. Bandmates tried to help, but addiction isolated him from everyone who cared. Heroin was no longer a habit. It was survival, control, and prison all at once. Unlike other artists who spiraled loudly, Layne disappeared quietly. Albums were delayed. Shows were canceled. Silence replaced momentum. When he did appear, he looked fragile, haunted, and exhausted. Addiction had stripped away his health, his relationships, and his future. Layne Staley's death was not sudden in an emotional sense. It felt like the final note of a long, tragic song. His story belongs on this list because heroin consumed him completely, erasing one of the most unique voices metal ever had. Addiction did not just end his career, it ended his life in isolation and silence. 9. Scott Weiland. Scott Weiland's addiction story is a long cycle of rise, collapse, recovery, and relapse. As the frontman of Stone Temple Pilots, he had charisma, vocal range, and star power. From the outside, he looked confident and unstoppable. Behind the scenes, heroin and cocaine controlled his every move. Addiction followed Scott from the early days of success. Arrests, rehab stays, and missed performances became routine. Band tensions exploded as reliability vanished. Each time he returned sober, hope followed. Each relapse crushed it again. Addiction kept resetting his progress back to zero. His health deteriorated over time. Legal trouble piled up. Relationships fractured. Even when he joined new projects, the same patterns repeated. Drugs dictated his schedule, his behavior, and his survival. Talent alone could not overpower dependency. Scott Weiland's death was the tragic end of a long public struggle. Fans had watched him fight for decades. His story fits this list because addiction repeatedly hijacked his career at its highest points. He had multiple chances, multiple rebirths, and multiple collapses. In the end, addiction outlasted everything else. 8. Axl Rose. Axl Rose's name is often linked to ego and controversy, but substance abuse played a major role in his downfall during Guns N' Roses' peak years. Alcohol and drugs amplified his volatility, turning raw emotion into destructive behavior. As fame exploded, control vanished. Heavy substance use fueled paranoia, mood swings, and extreme unpredictability. Shows started late or ended abruptly. Riots followed canceled performances. Band members grew frustrated and eventually walked away. Addiction magnified Axl's worst instincts and made collaboration nearly impossible. Studio sessions dragged on endlessly, often derailed by intoxication and obsession. Entire albums stalled as substance abuse clouded focus and discipline. While his voice remained powerful, his reliability vanished. The band that once ruled the world slowly dissolved under chaos. Axl Rose survived his addiction era, but the damage was massive. Years were lost. Momentum disappeared. Guns N' Roses became a cautionary tale instead of an unstoppable force. His story fits this list because substance abuse did not just hurt him personally, it derailed one of the biggest bands in heavy music history at the height of its power. 7. Slash. Slash's addiction story is almost as famous as his guitar riffs, which is exactly why he belongs in Worst Junkies in heavy metal history. At the height of Guns N' Roses' success, Slash was everywhere. Stadium tours, non-stop press, and a larger-than-life image followed him daily. Alongside that fame came a brutal dependence on heroin, alcohol, and cigarettes that nearly erased him. Heroin became the center of Slash's routine. It was not casual use or experimentation. It was full dependency that dictated his schedule, his health, and his survival. His body began to shut down under the pressure. Multiple overdoses, hospitalizations, and near-death experiences became part of his reality. At one point, his heart stopped, and doctors brought him back after several terrifying minutes. Addiction also damaged his working relationships. Tension inside Guns N' Roses grew as reliability faded. While Slash continued to deliver iconic performances, everything behind the scenes was unstable. Recording sessions were chaotic, touring life became dangerous. Addiction was no longer hidden, it was openly consuming him. Health consequences piled up fast. Years of substance abuse led to serious medical conditions that forced Slash to confront reality. Doctors made it clear that continuing down the same path would end his life. That moment finally pushed him toward sobriety. Slash survived, but his story earns its place here because of how close addiction came to killing him and destroying one of rock and metal's most important careers. His legacy now includes recovery, but the damage done during his addiction era was severe, long-lasting, and nearly fatal. 6. Dave Mustaine. Dave Mustaine's addiction story is deeply tied to anger, instability, and self-destruction. Before Megadeth even existed, drugs and alcohol had already derailed his path. His firing from Metallica was directly linked to substance abuse and violent behavior fueled by addiction. That moment could have ended everything. Instead of slowing down, Dave doubled down. Alcohol, heroin, and cocaine became constant companions as Megadeth rose to prominence. His talent was undeniable, but addiction magnified paranoia, rage, and control issues. Band lineups constantly changed because relationships could not survive the chaos. Trust was rare. Stability was impossible. Addiction affected Dave physically and mentally. Performances suffered. Health problems emerged early. His behavior alienated collaborators and industry figures alike. Even as Megadeth released successful albums, the band felt like it could collapse at any moment. Addiction was always present, threatening progress. Eventually, Dave hit a breaking point. Health scares and legal trouble forced him to confront the damage. Sobriety did not come easily, but it became necessary for survival. Recovery allowed him to rebuild Megadeth into a more stable force, but the scars of addiction never fully disappeared. Dave Mustaine belongs on this list because addiction shaped his reputation as much as his music. It cost him friendships, stability, and nearly his life. His career stands as proof that talent can survive addiction, but not without deep and lasting consequences. 5. James Hetfield. James Hetfield's struggle with addiction is often overshadowed by Metallica's massive success. But alcohol nearly destroyed everything he built. From the outside, he looked disciplined and controlled. Inside, alcohol was quietly taking over. Drinking became his escape from pressure, trauma, and fame. As Metallica grew bigger, the demands intensified. Long tours, constant expectations, and personal pain fueled heavier drinking. Alcohol affected his emotional control, leading to anger, withdrawal, and strained relationships within the band. Tension became unavoidable. Communication broke down. The breaking point came when James entered rehab, halting Metallica entirely. That decision exposed how serious the problem had become. Alcohol was no longer manageable. It was dictating his behavior, his availability, and his mental health. The band nearly fell apart during this period. Even after recovery, relapse remained a threat. Years later, James returned to rehab again, proving how persistent addiction can be. His honesty about the struggle revealed how close Metallica came to losing its foundation. James Hetfield fits this list because addiction did not just threaten his life, it threatened one of the biggest bands in heavy metal history. Alcohol quietly worked behind the scenes, nearly collapsing a global powerhouse from the inside. 4. Lemmy Kilmister. Lemmy Kilmister built an image around excess, and addiction was inseparable from that identity. As the leader of Motorhead, Lemmy lived on a constant mix of speed, alcohol, and cigarettes for decades. This was not a phase. It was a lifestyle he openly embraced and never attempted to hide. Amphetamines kept him awake. Alcohol fueled endless nights. Cigarettes filled every gap in between. His routine would have destroyed most people within years, yet Lemmy pushed on for decades. That endurance turned him into a myth, but it also masked serious damage happening underneath. Health problems eventually caught up with him. Diabetes, heart issues, and declining strength were direct results of long-term substance abuse. Even then, Lemmy refused to slow down completely. Touring continued. Drinking continued. Addiction was treated as tradition rather than danger. Lemmy's story earns its place on this list because he normalized extreme substance abuse within metal culture. While admired for surviving it, the cost was enormous. His body paid the price, and his life was shortened by years of relentless excess. He became a symbol of metal rebellion, but also a warning. Lemmy proved how far the human body can be pushed, and how unforgiving addiction eventually becomes, no matter how legendary the figure attached to it. 3. Vince Neil. Vince Neil's addiction. Story is one of reckless excess, poor judgment, and long-lasting damage. As the frontman of Motley Crue, he became the face of glam metal's wildest era. Fame came fast, and so did alcohol. Heavy drinking was not occasional for Vince. It was constant, unchecked, and deeply woven into his daily life. Over time, alcohol stopped being part of the party and became the driver of his worst decisions. His drinking led directly to tragedy. A drunk driving crash took a life and permanently injured others, marking a turning point that should have slowed everything down. Instead, alcohol continued to dominate his behavior. Legal trouble followed. Arrests, fines, and court appearances became part of his public image. Even during peak success, discipline was missing. Alcohol also affected his performance. Live shows became inconsistent. Vocals weakened. Reliability disappeared. Band tensions grew as frustration mounted. Motley Crue survived, but not without scars. Vince's addiction strained relationships inside the band and damaged trust with fans and promoters alike. As years passed, the effects became more visible. Weight gain, health issues, and declining stage presence reflected decades of abuse. Comeback tours leaned heavily on nostalgia, while criticism followed his inability to perform at earlier standards. Alcohol had already taken its toll. Vince Neil belongs on this list because addiction did not just damage his health, it caused irreversible harm to others, weakened his career, and permanently altered his legacy. His story stands as one of the clearest examples of how unchecked substance abuse can turn fame into destruction without ever fully stopping the party. 2. Nikki Sixx. Nikki Sixx's addiction story is one of the darkest and most extreme in heavy metal history. As the bassist and main songwriter of Motley Crue, he helped create the soundtrack of Excess. Behind the scenes, heroin ruled his life. This was not recreational use. It was full dependency that pushed him to the edge of death repeatedly. Heroin consumed Nikki's body and mind. He overdosed and was clinically dead before being revived by paramedics. Even that moment did not immediately stop the cycle. Addiction continued, pulling him deeper into isolation, paranoia, and self-destruction. Music became secondary to survival. His drug use affected everyone around him. Bandmates struggled to keep the group functional. Relationships collapsed. Trust vanished. Nikki's health deteriorated rapidly as heroin took control. Each tour became a gamble. Each recording session carried risk. Eventually, survival forced change. Nikki entered recovery and faced the damage head-on. His sobriety became a defining part of his later career, but the cost of addiction was already immense. Years were lost. Trauma remained. The scars never fully faded. Nikki Sixx earns this position because his addiction reached fatal extremes and reshaped his entire life. Few metal musicians came closer to dying from drugs and lived to tell the story. His survival does not erase the destruction. It confirms just how deep and dangerous his addiction truly was. 1. Ozzy Osbourne. Ozzy Osbourne sits at the top of this list because no one embodies substance abuse in heavy metal more completely. As the frontman of Black Sabbath and later a solo icon, Ozzy's talent helped define the genre. At the same time, his addiction became legendary. Alcohol, cocaine, pills, and countless other substances dominated his life for decades. Ozzy's drug use was constant and extreme. Blackouts, arrests, hospitalizations, and public scandals followed him everywhere. He damaged relationships, endangered himself, and repeatedly pushed his body beyond safe limits. At times, his behavior became so unpredictable that bandmates and managers feared for his survival. His addiction led directly to his firing from Black Sabbath, despite being the voice that helped make them famous. Even after rebuilding his career, substance abuse continued to haunt him. Health problems piled up. Memory loss, physical decline, and long-term damage became unavoidable. What separates Ozzy from everyone else on this list is longevity. He did not spiral briefly. He lived inside addiction for decades and somehow survived. That survival turned chaos into mythology, but the cost was enormous. His body paid the price. His family suffered. His career was constantly at risk. Ozzy Osbourne stands as the ultimate example of heavy metal excess. His story defines the title Worst Junkies in heavy metal history because addiction was not a chapter in his life. It was the story itself. So now you know the ugly truth hiding behind the distortion and screaming amps. These metal legends gave everything to the music, but addiction took far more than it ever gave back. Some stories ended in survival. Others ended in silence. And once you see how deep the damage went, it hits different, doesn't it? If this video shocked you, do not stop here. Hit like to support the channel, subscribe so you do not miss the next dark story, and turn on notifications to stay one step ahead. Which metal star's downfall surprised you the most, and which story should we uncover next?